Welcome everybody to the BeBop Technology Making Cloud Economics Work with our partners Fusion Workflows. I'm Bruce Long, I'm the Chief Executive Officer of BeBop, and it gives me great pleasure to host you today. I hope you're having at least a sane Wednesday. It's not easy to do. I know it's rather bizarre out there, but we're going to do our best to take your mind off of everything going on outside of this conversation and bring you into a deep dive on workflows in the cloud. I want to start out our conversation today by announcing a partnership. No surprise to you guys, we're announcing the partnership with Fusion Workflows today. Mark Turner and Chris Vienneau will be joining us to talk about what Fusion does, and I'll simply give you this table setter. BeBop, as I'm hoping you probably know, is a platform that virtualizes workflows in the cloud, whether it's editorial, visual effects, all of the workflows you have in post-production, production, and distribution can be migrated to the cloud. And up to this point, BeBop has been carrying the torch by ourselves. We work with, of course, Adobe, we work with Amazon, Azure, and Google, but in terms of taking large enterprise customers and helping them make those decisions to migrate to the cloud, BeBop's been carrying that torch by ourselves until now. Today, I'm happy to announce that working side by side with BeBop Technology, if the logo seems similar, that's because they're family, is Fusion Workflows. And the focus of Fusion Workflows and the focus of that partnership is to get to the C-level organizations or the C-level parts of the organizations and really help you guys guide your companies into safe harbor in the cloud. I know there's been a tremendous amount of consternation about everybody saying, oh, we got to go to the cloud or we've got to work remotely. And for sure that we will talk about that today. But what we've learned is working in the cloud is secure when you do it properly. Working in the cloud is efficient when you do it properly. And when you take your workflows and you optimize them for the cloud, we always have a great experience. And what we realized is there was a shortfall on our side, and we really needed a team of folks that had the same experience that you all do in working in these creative disciplines. And we thought, how wonderful that Mark has formed this great company with Chris. So they're going to talk a little bit about their plans and their company. And then in about a month, we'll talk about that also. We're going to do a much deeper dive on the economics of the cloud. And we're going to do a little longer webinar, maybe an hour, in the first week of July. So you guys can come back to us with a deeper dive. I really want to encourage you to ask questions today. Please go ahead and we have Chris Kapczynski monitoring the questions, and we'll make sure to get to those, and if we don't, we'll email you after. But let me just underscore this. The value of the conversation today is to make sure that we talk about the stuff that you're interested in, that we don't just address very large companies, we also address medium-sized companies, we address small companies. So without further ado, let me hand it off to Dave Benson, my CTO and my partner, Mark Turner, my friend, and Chris Vienneau, my friend. Thank you, guys. Take it away.
Thanks, Bruce. What a lovely intro. Dave, do you want to say a few words, or do you want me to start rambling?
No, I think you can pick it up from there, Mark. We've got a limited amount of time today, so let's jump right in.
So I'll just add my thanks to Bruce there for the introduction and just reiterate, BeBop's had more experience in doing cloud workflows than I think probably any company when it comes to creative workflows. And that counts for a lot when something like COVID happens. And the reason why Fusion exists is because Chris and I and a few others saw this huge thought vacuum going on around cloud. There was a rush when COVID kicked off and everybody went rushing into work from home. And got stuff to work, right? They plugged stuff together. We've got remote editing working. We've got systems running, but they were not secure. They were not necessarily a long-term plan. They probably weren't built very economically. And really the Fusion and BeBop opportunity is just, as we all now start going back into the offices, to sit back and go, okay, look, we've proven that people can work remotely, but that wasn't necessarily the cloud plan that we all had in mind. Now let's take a breath and figure out a proper cloud-based workflow and build for the future. And Chris and I will talk a little bit about some of those economics and what's driving some of those decisions as we sort of go through this today. But so we'll crash through a few slides here. We'll just sort of introduce some of the thoughts and give you some stuff to sort of whet your appetite, and then we can launch into a conversation and answer some of your questions. So, Chris, do you want to click forward a little bit? Okay, here's my first question when we talked about Fusion. Would you build a house without an architect? And the inverse of that is, would you launch a cloud business without an architect? Because if you get it wrong, click it, Chris. This is kind of what you end up with, which is like a temporary solution, and then the thing starts caving in. And that's what we're going to head into at the end of this year if we don't sort of re-architect a lot of the hacks that we use to get through COVID. So when it looks at who is Fusion, there's a few of us. We added it up. We got to about 200 years worth of experience in cloud and cloud-based workflows and media workflows, and then we stopped adding up because it got a bit depressing. So there's a lot of gray heads around here, but we cover. If you look at the history, we've got people with a visual effects background, people with gaming backgrounds, people with sports, local broadcast, OTT streaming, post-production. I probably missed some, but pretty much every form, music industry, pretty much every form of media that's out there. And the way we work is a virtual team. So depending on the client and what they need, we put together the right people who understand their specific workflows, and then delve deep on what is it that you're trying to get done. That's there's no product at Fusion. There's not a you buy it off the shelf. Fusion is all about what do you do today, and how could you do that better in the cloud, and that's what we're really after. So here's some things to get you thinking. And I'll cover some of these, and Chris can chip in on the latter half. So I mentioned COVID. It's a crisis, obviously. It's been a disaster in many ways. But it is also an opportunity for people to think again about how they build their business, not just how they make money in some cases on the distribution side, but also, how are we running the operations? How we run CapEx versus OpEx? How are we paying for people? How are we running stuff on-prem? And is there a better way? And, let's be honest, the media industry has been incredibly inefficient. Always has been, pretty much. As soon as you add creative and technology, you end up with kind of inefficiencies. But now is the opportunity to really look again at a proper hard look and say, is there an opportunity to do things differently? And I really think this has been a changing point for the entire industry. There is so many people now who are used to working from anywhere, not just working from home, but working from anywhere. There's no putting that genie back in the bottle. You try and force them back into an office now and sit there for 40, 60, 100 hours a week, you're going to have an issue. So we might as well embrace that now and say, all right, now's the opportunity to think hard about what we're doing. The other thing that I've started noting is, cloud workflows always used to be the issue from a CTO and a CIO. And what we started seeing now is actually, no, it's a financial issue. It's a board level. It's a governance problem now. When you consider the risk to a business that COVID created, the fact that your entire operation may shut down, that's now a board level problem. Business continuity is a board level governance problem. So now we're seeing CFOs moving into the cloud space and saying, yeah, I know you've been talking about it for a long time, but I'm really interested in finding out more now. How can we run this business and protect ourselves that when we have a second wave of COVID, which we will, and when we have another disaster, the earthquake finally hits LA, or there's some hurricane on the East Coast, like we now need to create truly place agnostic media businesses, and there's a lot of work in that to be done. The other thing I'll mention is, it doesn't say technology in our title, it says workflow. And that's intentional because a cloud-based workflow is obviously there's infrastructure involved, and there's hardware and software as part of that. But the people part is a big part. And you'll see on our list of experts, we've got change management people on purpose because a lot of this is, do I have the right people? Do I have the right skills with those people? I might have a team of great hardware engineers who are great at racking and stacking equipment, but if I'm going to move everything to the cloud, how can I retrain those people to be able to then support a virtualized infrastructure or a software-defined workflow? So there's a lot of soft issues to think through in something as big as moving a workflow off of premises and into virtualized environments. And then the last point I'll make is about staying nimble. And multiple industries have sort of moved into the cloud before media and entertainment did. But it's still pretty early days. You know, we are 5 years, maybe if you're really generous, 8 years into the cloud migration. That's pretty early days for an emerging technology where big companies are spending billions per quarter to add features and services and new technology. So one thing that I underscore with everyone is you got to stay nimble, and you've got to build things in such a way that you can switch as the market switches, as new technologies come along. You know, the move to GPU and in visual effects is a great example, right? You don't want to be locked in anymore to having a massive, great CPU-based render farm and then find out in 18 months the whole world moved to a dynamic GPU-based world. So keep nimble and don't get locked in. And there's a trick to that. And there's a lot of people out there who will try and lock you into a solution or a stack. So it's hard to resist, but bear that one in mind. Chris, you want to pick up on the next one?
Sure. And thanks, Mark and Dave and Bruce, for the chance to speak today. So I think, you know, as Mark said, this COVID crisis came upon us. And even before that, everybody was trying out the cloud, and the cloud is very easy to try out. You can start VMs in a heartbeat. You can even start GPUs, and you can, you know, very quickly be, you know, thinking that you are creating your workflow or replicating your workflow on the cloud. But then the second that you put that into production, or the second that you put a shot through that, or the second that you start to rely on that and you make a mistake, the cost can be very great, and you don't really get refunds on renders that don't work on the cloud, or if you forgot to turn off a machine. All these different things, these things can become very expensive very quick, right? And again, you have to get it right, because again, once you cobble together workflows in production, oftentimes they stick, and oftentimes the inefficiencies, they're not exposed till later. And again, if you're the owner of a facility or things like that, you might get the job done, you might make the client happy, but you might get a very big bill the next month. And I think, again, as you look at having, you know, many of the people on this call and others have, you know, on-prem infrastructure, have render farms, have machines. And again, if you are half of your workflows on the cloud and half of your workflows locally, and you don't really mitigate that, you know, the how things move across, it basically becomes more expensive to do the same work. And certainly the clients aren't paying you more to do the job. So again, when you go into a half in cloud, it's certainly more expensive. You know, you need to have dedicated internet. You need to move files around. And again, you know, moving the cost of moving files can be more expensive in some cases than storing them. So again, certainly this, you know, if you start this cloud process, this half in or this mullet phase of cloud implication, you certainly don't want to be there for long. And, you know, this is something where, you know, we've seen a lot of customers over the years as the cloud transition has come in, actually get stuck in this half in cloud phase and be able to show progress in terms of being able to render more things or do more simulations or do more workflows, but certainly they've been adding to their costs and certainly weren't ready for something like COVID. And the next thing, this next topic, CapEx versus OpEx. And I think obviously if you talk to your finance partner and, you know, your CFO and you're saying, I just need more machines, we have a bigger job, we need more connections, we need more storage, we need more hardware, they're comfortable with that conversation, because they're saying, okay, are we going to use this hardware over the next 3 years so we can buy a certain amount of machines and store them, and then they can depreciate over time, and then in 3 years Either you buy new ones or you don't. This world of associating operational expense or the cost of the hardware with the actual job is new. It's a new model. And this is something where, again, you know, we've talked about maybe later having a little bit more of a webinar, a little bit more deeper dive into sort of how that works. But again, the cost of running a machine over 3 years and the cost of hosting, paying for a machine as you use it or bursting is actually starting to equalize. And again, this is where something where, you know, you have to be able to have these conversations, because in some cases it's just tempting to go back to what you know. So buying more machines, sticking them in racks is something that people know, and everyone will say, I need those machines. But again, the machines that you bought potentially a year or 2 years ago are quite slower than the machines that are in the cloud. And again, thinking about the future where the cost per iteration, how much it costs you to do a particular iteration is just going to be the new way to work. Being able to associate the cost directly of how much it costs to compute something, how much it costs to render something, how much it costs to encode something with that particular iteration is going to be a game changer for certain types of clients. And I think, you know, we've been starting this off with a bit of doom and gloom in terms of, you know, this is the COVID era and, you know, these are things that are happening. But really, the migration to the cloud has been, in many cases, a huge differentiator for certain customers. You know, not everyone can live in London, not everyone can live in Los Angeles. And I have traveled the world visiting many clients in places like Stockholm or others. And the cloud has enabled them to really hit above their weight class, really clock in and take on work, episodic work for HBO, or, you know, Game of Thrones was just spread out all over the world because these particular customers were able to leverage the cloud. So really, I think, you know, again, you know, obviously, if you choose to take the, you know, the leap and want to be able to do bigger work or want to be able to break out of a local market or your genre, the cloud really provides you, again, that scalable capacity to, you know, take on the work as you need it. So again, I think that, you know, I'm glad that we ended on this thought, which is, again, is that, you know, going back to, yes, the COVID is a way to bring this to bear and to, you know, bring this in focus and saying, hey, maybe everyone has to have a cloud-based workflow to mitigate risk and move forward. But certainly the real promise of the cloud that, you know, you can work remote, you can scale up your workforce, scale up your compute for a particular job or iteration really is, in my mind, a game changer for small and medium businesses in the media entertainment space.
Chris, one thing just to add on to the end of all of this, I think, you know, as Mark said, the focus here is, as it says in the bottom corner, you know, very much around workflow and not the technology itself. But from, you know, I'll represent for a second from that side, is that what we have seen over the 5 years of BeBop and the 10 years of just managing migration to cloud environments is this overall really kind of characteristic of distributing things and distributing workflow and distributing process and distributing, you know, things that traditionally in our world were very undistributed, right? And so I think of things like, you know, even transfer technologies or render technologies or transcoding technologies that used to rely on, you know, a really, really dense box to make it go as fast as possible. And all that's happening over time, iteratively, you know, more and more, and the rate of that is increasing drastically, is as I said, this drastic distribution of all these processes. And so the reality, what that points to, both on the, you know, the cloud service provider side, which is leading the way and just providing unbelievably ubiquitous compute power anywhere in the world at this point, right? Truly. What's following very quickly behind that now is all of the software manufacturers that can now start to make use of that distributed infrastructure, right? So whereas a lot of the technologies and tools that we all use even today as we're speaking, were not necessarily built with that in mind, they're starting to move in that direction. And so, you know, the render processes in the desktop tool that you're using, whereas it may not be optimized today to leverage that, you know, hyper distributed architecture, it will be in the next 6 months. And so the time is now, you know, to kind of circle back to the point here, to really have these conversations and really dig in and understand, you know, as they say, skate to where the puck's going, that's where it's going.
Yeah.
Thank you for the Canadian reference. I appreciate
There
that.
you go.
That
Hey,
was pretty good.
Chris, click the next image up, Chris, because there's a point that they've made that I want to pick up on, which is that notion of, we used to spend, and it's a real bugbear. Those people know that I got a real bugbear about moving files to get to a process, which really bugs me, because the process is something that should move to the files. The files have gravity, and we waste so much of our time and energy and money in this business moving files between one process and the next, and writing them to a disk and moving them to that, physically moving the disk to someone and then copying it onto another one, and days and weeks are wasted doing this stuff.
So what's interesting, Mark, is that it used to be the opposite, and all we're seeing is the shift from one side to the other, right? Because the files used to be tiny. They used to be film. We just shipped them around, right? And the processing was the Technicolor film, facility. So that's not going anywhere. And all we've done,
it had big, expensive, dangerous chemicals in it that would blow up.
Well, that too, and nobody wanted to be near it. But the point is that the process has become highly distributed, just like we just said. And to your point, the files are now massive and growing and growing and growing. So we've just flipped the script on the requirements, and we're kind of just catching up to that now.
Well, and really, again, you look at the problem of the cloud is latency. It's just how fast can you get the data to the right place, and that really is, again, where it's people's processes and workflows that prevents the file. That compute is there. Those computers are running 24/7, waiting for things to do. But if you can't feed them fast enough and you don't have the right processes and workflows, again, you can even, take advantage of that compute and end up with a very big bill, because you might have copied files to the wrong place, or you might have had computers waiting for a very long time. So again, I think that, this is, again, people have been building their capacity based on their infrastructure. And this is kind of, how do you shift your brain to how much work could you do if you could feed this massive distributed
Exactly. That's very well put, Chris. I agree.
Yeah. And that notion of, people say, I'm going to try and recreate my business in the cloud. You're really missing the point, right? That's what Chris is basically saying, is if you're just looking to lift and shift everything you do in the cloud, the economics is going to be very different, and your CFO might have a heart attack. But that's because you're not using the cloud in the right way. And it's an opportunity
you missed NAB, 3 years ago.
Maybe. But this is the opportunity to sort of wipe the slate clean and go, wait a second, what is it that we fundamentally do in our business, whatever it might be, whatever part of the business that is? And, what are the inputs and what are the outputs? And then the bit in the middle is now up for grabs. Let's think really creatively about, are we doing it the most efficient way? And it's not necessarily to try and lower the cost for the end customer. This is about driving margin up. This is about lowering my costs so I can do it smarter.
One of the other interesting things that I hear constantly, and it's a perception and nomenclature thing, really, I think at this point is, we say we're moving our business to the cloud, right? Or we're migrating to cloud, whatever the terminology is. And there's a notion or this idea that I think and pops into people's heads that all of a sudden my facility is going poof, right? My building's going away. No one's going anywhere anymore. They're all sitting at home, right? And okay, so yes, we've all been sitting at home for the last 3 months, but that's for totally different reasons, obviously. All that it really does mean is that with something like BeBop as an example, right? Or I would say even just virtualizing the workstation portion of what you're doing, right? That puts you in a place where your existing facility may have just doubled in capacity, technically, because you just don't have to have all the people sitting in that building at the same time anymore, right? So it's really more of a question from where I'm sitting, or where BeBop is sitting, is how are you going to better leverage the real estate that you have? How are you going to rethink what the purpose of that real estate is, right? As an example, maybe it's not that people go there every day, right? Maybe it's that people go there for certain purposes. I'm totally thinking out loud here, but the point is to rethink it, to your point, Mark, earlier, right? It's the opportunity to really say, okay, as you said earlier, we were forced into proving that this works. So there's really no one that can stand there and say, I don't know if it's going to work. I don't think it'll work, right? Because we can all speak fairly educatedly about what does work, what we, as you said at the beginning, what maybe is not scalable or maybe was put in place quickly because it had to be. And those are the things that really are the opportunities to go back and implement properly for the future and as we move forward.
Right.
And I think the key is that, you know, when you look at these large cloud companies, Google, Amazon, you know, they are very big, and they really, you know, the level of detail they can bring to any particular market. They're just going to say there's compute everywhere, right? And they're going to say there's a GPU in this country. They really can't, you know, do that last mile of, you know, does it work? Does it relate to a certain industry? And for particular workflows like editing or compositing or 3D, you have to have some expertise relative to well, what would it really take? And obviously you have industry specific security that, again, you know, they might just say, hey, you know, the US Army uses this cloud, but really, you know, there are sometimes in places like Marvel that might have higher security, right? So definitely, you know, they just really feel like as Mark said, a gap where, you know, there's this beating drum of cloud, but there's really a gap of like, well, what does that really mean to actually run your business efficiently and legally and, you know, at scale in the cloud?
I think that's that you said it right there at that last thing you said is, and Mark kind of alluded to it earlier, is that, you know, when we're forced into situations, we invent things that's, you know, that's how it works, and certainly in our industry. And so, you know, I'll just say personally, I'm proud to watch everything that has transpired over the last 3 months and what we've been able to do and our partners have been able to do and everybody has been able to do to really rise up and meet the challenge, right? But that doesn't mean that was the way it should have been done, right? And especially to your point, Chris, when you get to scale, which I would argue that none of these temporary solutions are really there yet because they're just doing what they had to do for the last 3 months. When everybody comes back, whatever that looks like, they're going to get to scale, and that's when things start falling over, right? And we need to get ahead of that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a big difference with running 5 workstations in the cloud to 105 workstations in the cloud. There are problems that you haven't yet seen where things die by their own weight.
So guys, I want to be conscious of time here. I know that the three of us could probably sit here and yap all day about this, and we hope to do that.
And we have.
You. But we'll have 1 minute left, so I'll kind of hand it to you guys to wrap up.
Yeah, and look, I would say this was the start of a conversation. Bruce mentioned at the beginning, there's actually click on a slide on, Chris. There's we'll have another opportunity to talk more in July. Obviously, this is a very general conversation, but we're going to try and get a lot more specific in the next one. We're going to try and plug out of Dave and Bruce what 5 years worth of cloud actual experience really means, and what can everybody else leverage from that when you're thinking through economics, or you're thinking through, you know, how do I scale it? How many workstations do I need? How much shared memory do I really need? You know, there's some important facts in there that we can all share around. So we're going to try and do that on the next one of these, at a Going Deeper event on the 1st of July. So tune in for that. And meanwhile, you know, if you want to have an individual chat, then obviously you know where we both are, and that's our websites. That's the last thing I'd leave.
And if there are any particular questions or things you'd want us to cover in this, again, one of the things we'd like you to do is invite potentially your CFOs or other people that might need to know this information to these webinars going forward. Or if you need us to you know, help the conversations internally, please reach out to, you know, anyone, and that can help us with the next webinar, so that, you know, even though we could talk about this all day, if we're not talking about things you care about, then, you know, that's really not that important.
Yeah, good point.
Agreed. Well, all right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Mark. Look forward to the next one.
Thank
Everybody
you.
have a great day.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Bruce.